Well, hello everyone and welcome. This is our Improving Stressful Relationships live stream call. And I'm here to answer any questions you have. And what I did this time, because I wasn't sure what you'd be coming to the call with, is collect some questions that I got via email. And I noticed that they had a pattern to them. So I'm pulling this up. I don't know if I can share my screen with you, but I'm going to take a look at it where it has a list of the questions. And so listen to these questions and tell me if you can hear the pattern. So how can I get my husband to help more around the house? How can I motivate my team to work harder? How can I keep my kids focused on their schoolwork? How can I get my boss to recognize my work? How can I get my neighbor to stop making so much noise? So those are the questions, and what I'd like to see, and just chat it in if you notice the pattern with any of the questions that I put in there. What do they all have in common? I'm just going to see if the chat box opens up here. Yeah, it does. Good. They typically want something from someone else, is something that somebody said, so perfect. And so let's do something. Let's replace one word in the sentence of all of these questions, right? How can I make my husband help around the house? How can I make my team work harder? How can I make my kids do their schoolwork? How can I make my boss recognize my work? How can I make my neighbor be quiet? So what all these things have in common is you're trying to make people do something. And you can't make people do something. So that's one of the things that causes the most stress in relationships, right? Trying to make other people do things that you know they need to do, and oftentimes they need to do that in order for you to be okay, is really stressful, because trying to control something that you can't control is one of the key sources of stress. So anytime any client comes to me and says, oh my gosh, I'm really stressed out, sometimes we'll do this exercise where we have them identify everything that they're stressed out about, and we'll say, where do you have complete control? And where do you have no control, and where do you not have maybe a little bit of control, maybe you have some influence but not full control. And just getting clear on what degree of control they have makes tons of difference in their stress level. It goes down immediately, realizing that they don't have control over certain things. Like I might go into a negotiation going, I have to get this raise. But when I realize I don't have control over getting that raise, then my stress goes down. So what happens here is these are all relationship issues. So if I want to make my husband help around the house, really I'm trying to convince him to help around the house. But I'm measuring my success in whether or not he complies, but I can't control whether he complies. So that's going to increase my stress because I'm trying to control something I can't control. Right? I can't control whether my husband actually does it or not. And then we get into a power struggle. So if you have a situation like this, and I'd like you to think about people in your life that you're trying to get to do something. I feel this strongly when I think back to when I had younger kids, and I'm just imagining all the parents in this COVID crisis trying to get their kids to do their schoolwork, and I'm imagining myself with my kids trying to make them do their schoolwork, make them stay focused. And it would have been a nightmare for me because I feel like I have to make them do it. It's my responsibility, but I can't control them even though they're my kids. They're not robots. So let's see if anybody else had any situations that come up. I'm going to flip over here and take a look in the chat box, see if anybody else came up with anything. Often what you'll find is people who matter to you, who live with you, like roommates. You know, you might want to get everyone in your house, if you're living with roommates, to do their fair share. And you're finding that a couple people aren't doing their fair share. So it might be, well, how can I get them to do their fair share? Something like that. Okay. All right. Well, you're going to find that this is a situation that happens a lot. And what I've done is develop a very simple 3-step process that you can use anytime you're in a situation where you're feeling stress in a relationship because you're trying to get somebody to do something, or there's somebody that you're in relationship with, and it could be a coworker, it could be a boss, it could be a sibling, a parent, anybody, a friend, that you really need them to do something. Show up to our appointments on time. Do your fair share of the housework. Do your fair share of the project. Come to my meetings on time. Do what you're supposed to do. Wear a mask when you go outside. All these things. There's 3 steps, and you can apply these 3 steps to just about anything that any of these types of situations that you encounter. So number 1, number 2, number 3. Number 1 is detach from the outcome. Number 2 is request change in a series of conversations. And number 3 is execute a realistic consequence. So we're going to go through both of these things. So number 1, detach from the outcome. This is really important because if you are attached to the outcome, that means you have to have something happen. So let's say that you're in a situation where you have roommates and you all live in a house together, and someone comes up to you and starts nagging you to do your fair share of whatever they deem important. So I had this happen to me once when I was in a business with 2 other partners, and one of the partners said, we all need to network, and we need to go to these evening networking events, and I think we should split them up. And so what she's trying to do is get us to all do our fair share, quote unquote, of networking events. And I immediately thought, and at the time I had very young kids, and I immediately thought, I'm not going out at night. That's not what I signed up for. And that's, I understand that she wants us to all share in the marketing of this business. But in her mind, it was, we all have to do this. We all have to go to these evening networking events. And because there's 10 of them, we all need to go to 3 of them. So that's what it feels like. It feels like someone's trying to control you on the other end. So if you're the one that's trying to get me to go to the networking events, you're going to be feeling kind of stressed out because you're trying to convince me. And if you come to me and you start telling me all the reasons why you think I should do it, and you have that energy of being attached to the outcome, I'm going to feel like you're trying to manipulate me or control me. And the same thing happens with every situation. So if you're mad because your husband doesn't do his share of the housework, and you try to have a conversation with him about it, and he says, yeah, I'll help, but then he still doesn't, and you're getting angrier and angrier and angrier, then every single situation you have is going to be charged with, I have to make him do his fair share. And you may feel back into the corner because you may not have thought out, what am I going to do if he never does his fair share? Am I going to divorce him? Well, that's kind of a long, large, arduous process. So detaching from the outcome involves a couple of things. And the first thing it involves is imagining yourself in a situation where the person that you need to do whatever never does it. So if it's my husband doing chores, they never do chores. If I'm trying to get you to do your fair share of networking events, I have someone who refuses. If you're my kid and I need you to do your homework, imagine my kid never does their homework. That might be scary to imagine, but you need to imagine that in order to get yourself detached. So you have to imagine the worst case scenario, and then you have to imagine how you'll be okay in that worst case scenario. So we go back in time and we think about me trying to get my kids to focus on their schoolwork. I would have to actually sit back, and instead of thinking they have to get grades, they have to get A's, they have to get this work done, and I don't even know what will happen if they don't, so it just has to happen, I think to myself, how would I be okay if it never happened? And then I think of ideas, and they're not necessarily pleasant ideas. Maybe my kids would have to be held back a year. Maybe my kids would be behind. Maybe I would have to hire private tutors for my kids. I mean, there's probably lots of options if my kids couldn't focus. But if my kids had a medical condition where they couldn't focus, I would have been much more accepting of it. So your job in number 1, detaching from the outcome, is considering your options. Let's say you have a boss that never gives you the time of day. One of the options might be looking for a new job. So start thinking about those options. So in a situation where the husband won't pull his own weight, maybe you know after you think through it that you're never going to divorce him just for not doing his fair share of the chores. I mean, maybe you will, but maybe it's like, no, that's not a deal breaker. I'm not going to divorce him, but I'm still going to be really stressed out about it. So what can I do? Well, maybe what I can do is put all his stuff in one room, right? Get it out of the way and have one room where I'm not even caring about that has his clutter in it. Or maybe I just don't cook meals every single day for us. Maybe we don't have to always have dinner together. Maybe I'll cook meals 3 nights a week. And then I'll tell him, I would love you to cook a meal a couple nights a week, but if you don't want to cook, I'd love you to bring carry out home. But then I also have a backup plan if he forgets about that. And if he doesn't do that, then maybe I'm going to just make myself a sandwich, and then if he asks me what's for dinner, I'm going to say, well, this is your night, so if you're going to make something, I'd be happy to join you, but if not, I'm just going to make myself a sandwich. So you really have to go there. And none of the other things are going to work unless you're willing to go there. So I think that's probably the key to success when it comes to this question of how do I convince so-and-so to do something? How do I inspire my team to be more motivated? How do I, whatever it is I want to elicit out of other people, I have to be detached from the outcome. It gives me more negotiating power. In fact, if you go into a negotiation not being detached to the outcome, you have more negotiating power than anybody else in the negotiation. Okay, so that's step 1, and it's really important. And I'm just going to check and see if anyone has any questions about that before we move on. So we do have a question. What are best ways to approach this situation of convincing them to do something you want? And I'm going to assume that that is better ways to approach them than ways that don't work, right? So we have good ways and we have bad ways, right? I'm going to assume the bad way elicits a bad reaction. So that's actually our step 2 and 3. So let me just take a look here. So the most important thing is if you are going to request change, because that's step 2, request change on a series of conversations, you have to have what we call neutral energy. Neutral energy is energy that's neutral or positive. If you are attached to the outcome, you're going to have charged energy. You're going to have energy that feels manipulative. And people will get defensive immediately, no matter what you say. You could say the nicest thing in the world, and it won't work if you're upset. So if you're trying to make somebody do something, they will respond to you negatively. So that's why you have to, number 1, detach from the outcome first. Now, you're going to get the same benefit of the doubt if you go in with neutral energy, neutral or positive energy. It basically is giving somebody space to be themselves. It's like 100% unconditional accepting energy. It says you get to make your own choices. All of a sudden, I don't feel controlled by you anymore, and I'm willing to listen. So now you have a little bit of the benefit of the doubt. You don't have to necessarily say it right to get the message across. That neutral energy is the most important component. But I'll give you a couple things. The first thing is I would share what it is that you want them to do. So I would really like it if we could share in making dinners, because I get exhausted and I get resentful when I make dinner all 7 days of the week. So I really love it if we could split it up. But then immediately, what are your thoughts on that? So if you could start right off with, this is what I would like, what are your thoughts on that? And then also, in your neutral energy, listen to their perspective. So let's use the example of the networking events. Let's say she had come to me and said, I would really like us to share the evening networking events between us partners in this organization. So there's 10, and I'd like us to each do 3 apiece. What are your thoughts on that? And then I would not have felt attacked or controlled. What I would have said was, well, I understand that it's important for us to share in the marketing responsibilities for our business that we partner in, so I absolutely buy into that. But going to evening networking events is kind of a deal breaker for me because I have small kids at home. And so if there's a way for me to share in the networking by going to noon events, or maybe I can share in the marketing by doing something else during my hours, which are 9 to 4, I'd be willing to do that. But I'm actually not willing to go to evening events. That sounds really nice and eloquent because I'm not emotionally attached right now. If you're emotionally attached, it can get more contentious. So if I say those things, then you have to listen. So if she was overly attached to me doing evening networking events and we had that conversation, she'd feel immediately, she'd interpret my declining of wanting to do evening events as my unwillingness to do my share. But if she asks what my thoughts are and she really listens, she will hear that I do intend to do my share. I would just like to think about dividing it up in a different way. And that might happen in a chores conversation. It might be happen in a schoolwork conversation. So you listen, and then you make a request. So let's say they say something you absolutely don't agree with, and I'm just going to pull up if I have any other follow-up chats here. But let's say they say you ask your husband to help with the chores, and he's like, well, I do the outside all the time. I'm cleaning up the yard, and I'm taking out the trash, and I go to work all day, and I do all the car repairs, and you're not even counting those in chores because you never help me with those. So why now that you do these 3 chores on the inside, you cook meals and you do the laundry, how come I have to do those things? So now you have a dialogue going. And that dialogue may not get you to an agreement, right? But it'll at least get you talking about how you're both thinking about the situation. And then you just make a request. So, okay, well, would it be, if you're not willing to help make any dinners, but I get really tired and resentful if I'm making dinner 7 days a week, how are you with me making dinner 3 days a week, and then we either have carry out 2 days and leftovers the other 3 or something like that, right? So yeah, I come up with an idea of how do I make the next request. You want to expect this to be a series of conversations. So you never expect it to go perfectly the first time, and that's another key to success. So the first key to success is be detached from the outcome. The second key to success is don't expect your first conversation to get a perfect result. Expect it to be a series of conversations. Expect the 2 of you to talk about it and then try something, and then either it works or it doesn't work. So now the third step, execute realistic consequences. What I mean by that is, in step 1, you imagine the worst case scenario. You imagine that they didn't do at all what you wanted them to do. Step 2, you started having conversations with them. How are you going to, in step 1, make yourself okay? So let's say I was going to make myself okay, not by divorcing my husband, but by, again, deciding that I'm simply not going to do his laundry. I'll do my laundry, and I'm just going to leave his laundry in the hamper, and he can wash it if he wants or wear it dirty. It doesn't matter to me. And I'm okay with that. I'm okay with doing that. So it has to be a consequence you're okay executing. You can't say, I'm going to get a divorce or I'm going to quit this job, and then know that you're really not going to do that, because then you're not going to be happy. So you have to think of a consequence that makes sense, that's natural, that doesn't seem retaliatory, but that seems pretty reasonable. Okay? So let's say we're talking to the husband about laundry. You know what? Laundry is exhausting to me. I do laundry for myself and for the kids. I'm wondering if you'd be willing to share on the laundry responsibility. And he says, yeah, sure, I will. And then he doesn't. And then you ask again and you say, gosh, I've done 5 loads of laundry this week. I really need your help. He's like, oh, yeah, I forgot. I didn't do it. I'll help. And that goes on for, let's say, 5 conversations, and you're still not getting any results. Then you begin to execute your consequence. So let's say consequences, I'm just not going to do his laundry. Then you don't talk to him about it anymore. You just don't do his laundry. You don't initiate more conference. You just do your consequence. And then he faces the consequence, and then he decides what to do. He might say, hey, how come you didn't do my laundry? And you can still be sweet. You have to be sweet. You have to be emotionally neutral. You could say, well, we said we were going to share the laundry. I noticed that you've been having a hard time getting into the schedule of it. So I'm prioritizing on my clothes because they need to get done and the kids' clothes. And I figured the best thing that you can do is your own laundry and, take it from there. So it's a series of conversations with no negative emotional energy, constant mutual respect, expectations that change takes time. And what ends up happening over time is if you're successful, usually you do get buy-in. Okay? So that formula, 3 steps. Number 1, detach from the outcome. Number 2, have a series of conversations with neutral energy, low expectations, just talking it through. And then number 3, execute a realistic consequence. Could be like, if you're yelling at me, I'm going to leave the room, and then you have to leave the room. Has to be something that you can do. Could be with your kids, if you don't do your homework, we're not going to Disneyland, and then you don't go to Disneyland. You can't second guess yourself and say, oh, but we really were looking forward to Disneyland too, so let's go anyway. Right? Okay, so what I think I'm going to do now, I'm going to see if we have any more questions in the chat box. But for those of you that are online watching this recorded, you can always email me, nahid@coachnahid.com, and ask me more questions if you have any, and get some clarification that way. And for those of you that are on the call live, I'm just going to go ahead and turn off the recording so that the rest of our questions and discussions can be offline and private. So thanks very much for joining today. I really appreciate it.